going to introduce Tom Shirley. Tom Shirley is the president of New First Bank. New First Bank, if you look right across Highway 6, is one of their locations. It's here. He can tell you a little bit about the bank. His bank originated out of El Campo, Texas, did farm and ranch loans and equipment loans. They've been in business how many years?
121.
121 years. They know something about banking and what works. But I want him to give a brief synopsis of what's going on. If you need any of this information, hold on to this. Knowledge is power. You can let your consumers, your buyers, your sellers know what's going on and that they can be certain that their money in the bank is going to be safe. So, cool. Tom, have at it. Thank you.
What I want to just cover today is just what happened, why it happened, and how, and assure you that your deposits are safe. If they're not safe, we're going to poke you in the right direction. One of the handouts is probably one of the best and most simple articles I found on the internet about what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. And then on the back of that is some talking points our CFO put together on the differences between Silicon Valley and New First. While the numbers are significantly bigger at Silicon Valley, it's the ratios that we need to look at. So basically, we've had two bank failures and one bank closure within the last week. Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank failed due to a lack of liquidity and a run on deposits. Back in the 80s, back in the 08, 09, they were asset quality failures. This was the first time I've been in banking since 1987 that we've actually had a liquidity failure and due to a run on the bank. So there's another bank, Silvergate Bank, that closed on its own volition. They saw what was coming. They unwound the bank. They sold the assets. They did what they needed to do. All deposits were paid. The only people that lost money in that was the shareholders. FDIC didn't touch the bank. So we've had 3 bank closures, 2 were failed, and 1 was closed. All 3 are cases of too many eggs in too few baskets. These banks were focused on high-tech companies, tech startups, venture capital. That was Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature and Silvergate had a penchant toward crypto. And so what happens is when you get too many of these deposits within one bank, you get a concentration. One customer leaves the bank may not have cash on hand. It has to liquidate investments. And so what happened is all 3 of these banks, when rates were low, and we know rates are not low now, but when rates were low, that was during COVID and post-COVID, a lot of cash in the system, PPP. What did they do with all that cash? The banks couldn't lend the money fast enough, so they went out and bought bonds, mortgage-backed securities, treasuries, anywhere from 10 to 5 to 10 years. What happens to a fixed rate bond when rates go up? The market value of that fixed rate bond goes down. So what happened is basically when they were at the bottom, they bought all these bonds. Once rates started to rise, the value of those bonds went down. In fact, Silicon Valley Bank had an unrealized loss in its bond portfolio of $17.6 billion, which was more than its capital. It's great to have an unrealized loss until you have to realize it. So once that news got out, Wall Street got spooked. It was a publicly traded bank. The bank lost $160 billion of market cap in less than 24 hours. That spooks depositors. What do depositors do when they get spooked? They go and get their money out. They move it. Okay, now, so the bank runs out of available cash. What does it have to do? It goes and sells bonds at a huge loss, $1.6 billion. After it reported a $1.6 billion loss in its bond portfolio, they took it to the bottom line. The bank was closed in 48 hours. So that's exactly what happened. The FDIC, as we all know, covers each depositor up to $250,000. So that was the plan going in. I think the government has since made the decision to cover Silicon Valley's bank depositors and Signature's depositors up to the full amount. So who pays for that? We all do in some form or fashion. But Signature Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, all their capital is wiped out, shareholders lose. And Silvergate Bank, No government assistance, but the shareholders lose. So question is your money safe? Up to $250,000 in any FDIC insured bank? Yes. Don't worry about that. If you got a spouse and have a joint account, up to $500,000 in any one FDIC insured bank, you're good to go. What banks are certainly safe? The big four. Chase with $3.2 trillion in assets, arguably more than the federal government. Bank of America, $2.4 trillion in assets. Citibank, $1.8 trillion, and Wells Fargo at $1.7 trillion. Those big four are remarkably larger than the next one. Wells Fargo is 3 times larger than number 5. So if you have money in those banks, rest assured they're so large and they're so diversified, you're going to be fine. So what about my bank? Your bank, not my bank, your bank. So you ask yourself, what about my bank? Simply go in and ask the branch manager, not a teller. Ask the branch manager, what makes ABC Bank different than Silicon Valley Bank? Tell me why you're different than them and why it won't happen to ABC Bank. By now, every bank in the country should have their talking points for their customers. Our CFO put ours together, and it's page 3 of the handout that basically shows here's what happened to Silicon, here's where New First is, here's what won't happen. So all of your banks, if you're not banking with the big four, should have their talking points ready by now. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what happened. Liquidity runs on banks. I think social media flared some of this because there was Twitter going out and Silicon Valley and California is full of all that. I think some of that had some factor in the run, but when you've got venture capital companies and tech startups moving millions of dollars at a chunk out, that's really what happened. So I'm not going to plug New First. We've been around 121 years. We're very well capitalized. We take care of business. We've got branches from Victoria all the way to Sugar Land. We've got customers ranging from cattle farmers to real estate developers to HOAs. Been there, done that, been through many cycles. And we're friends with AMCAP. We do a lot of loans for Dale and his crew. We do all kinds of loans, mostly commercial. We do residential construction, residential lots, land. So that may appeal to some of y'all's customers. I don't know. But that's what we do. Our key mantra is at New First, we listen, we solve, and we deliver. Because that's what we do. We don't compete with the big boys because we can't. We just stay within our niche. We stick with what we know, and we stay away from what we don't. So
here's
that's
a question
it.
for you. What makes this different from people that go, this is 2008 all over again?
That was asset quality problems.
Okay.
Because what happened then, all the toxic debt that was put into mortgage-backed securities from all the quote unquote fraudulent mortgage lending going on, all those mortgages were put into these mortgage-backed securities that were then packaged up and sold to institutions and banks and such. Well, the market value of those mortgage-backed securities went in the tank because the underlying mortgages weren't any good.
Okay.
That was an asset quality fail.
Okay.
This is a liquidity fail. These banks will be sold. The assets will be sold. Other banks will come in, step in, and they'll just keep rolling. So that's the big difference. This is a liquidity problem. Do first and foremost from these banks, I'm going to call it greed in reaching for yield in their bond portfolios when rates were at the bottom. They loaded up on it and it bit them in the rear when rates went up, and they can't sell them to raise the cash for the deposit run. So it's a very simple run on the bank failures.
Are we
That's
gonna
the
see
difference.
some more of these in the next couple of weeks?
Possible. Yeah, possible. I think the banks that we've looked at hard have much more diversified deposit bases. You know, these guys loaded up on venture capital and tech and crypto.
Yeah.
Stuff's very volatile. They'll move in a minute once they hear wind of something. Most of the banks that we're dealing with in Houston, in Texas, don't put that many eggs in one basket.
So Donna, question.
So what is the direct impact on finances?
Should be zero. Should be zero. What might happen is the Fed will become less aggressive on interest rate increases in the future because it's the interest rate increases in order to fight inflation has resulted in these massive losses in these banks' bond portfolios. So possibly we'll see a top out, if not decline, in mortgage rates. So that could help you.
Right? Yes. Dale.
Dale.
Real quickly, define liquidity and what the requirements are for a bank in regards to the amount of money they actually have to have on
Sure.
hand.
Banks typically are required to keep 5% of cash on hand in relation to the deposits that they hold. That's a minimum. Most banks keep around 10%. New First is at 20%. So what happened to Silicon Bank that was at 5.4%? They didn't have much cash on hand. Wind got out that their bond portfolio is in the ditch. Wall Street got wind of it. Market cap went down. Deposits flew out of the bank. They couldn't meet the liquidity call. Game over. Yes, sir.
Hey,
Go ahead. Right, we'll go
So the FDIC, $250,000 of coverage for the depositors. Does the article say that they're going to be regulators cover more than $250,000?
Yes. On Silicon Valley and Signature, the government or the FDIC and the government have made the decision to cover 100% of the depositors in those two banks.
Okay.
Don't know that it'll happen for the next one, but it is for this one because Silicon Valley was a huge bank. They were $213 billion bank. And so that would create what they were seeing as too big of a ripple effect to have some of those uninsured deposits go away.
And if you go back and listen to Silicon Valley Bank, right, their business model, they got highly aggressive and they took on a lot of risk.
Yeah.
That was just their owners and their leaders, what they wanted to do at the time.
Yeah, it was a great idea at the time till it's not. And so startup loans, venture capital deposit bases, crypto, it came home to roost. Not conservative enough. And here we are.